Hey, Dave Kittle here. Welcome back to the Dave Kittle Show. I am a physical therapist and practice owner at Concierge Pain Relief Home Physical Therapy here in New York City, and also the CEO of the Fieldmaker Group. We are currently acquiring physical therapy practices in New York and New Jersey. And today we have a physical therapy colleague on the show. Today we have Mike Piekutoski. He's a physical therapist and the founder and advisor and consultant at PT Practice Sales and Consulting. You guys can check him out on the internet. His website and his firm's website, physicaltherapybrokers.com. And I was mentioning in the pre-interview, I was super impressed that they were able to get the physicaltherapybrokers.com domain URL. Anyway, Mike, welcome on the show. How are you?
Great, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So I appreciate your time and heard you over on Rafi Salazar's podcast, the Better Outcomes Show. Awesome show from Rafi. And I listened to your interview there. I heard what you had to say about exit strategy, a little bit about exit strategy, succession planning. EBITDA, you were talking about how you help physical therapy practice owners exit on their terms, exit their practice. And I had to get you on the show. So today we're mostly going to be talking about exit strategy, right?
Yes.
So let's start with a practice owner that if they're not, if they're just kind of early thinking about an exit strategy, the next chapter of their life, retiring, whatever it might be, how do you currently define exit strategy in relation to a therapy practice and an owner dynamic?
Yeah, to me, an exit strategy is a plan that a business owner will use to identify the right buyer at the right price, at the right time, with the right deal terms. So it's really a process that you go through to identify, where you're at relative to your goals and where you want to be. And a lot of the folks that I work with use it as more of a strategic planning tool early on in their practices to help them develop that strategic plan to get where they want to be when they're ready to exit.
And is it ever too early? Like maybe what's the timeline, or is it something that if an owner is looking to exit, they come to you guys, they speak with you for X amount of days or weeks, and then you kind of get going that way? Or is it something like it could be years in advance? Like what type of like timeline should an owner think about when considering an exit strategy and maybe contacting you and your firm or a firm like you guys, wherever they might be, depending on seriousness, like they're looking to sell either this year or like in 5 years? So like how and when should they come to you, and what's that timeline looking like?
It's never too early, Dave. At the end of the day, again, I think the exit planning, the tools and information that you learn through going through the exit planning process, what really helps people develop a strategic plan from where they are today to where they want to be. So I have worked with several folks, and more recently than in the past, who are very early on in their careers. A couple years, 2-3 years into their business, but they have very specific goals where they want to go, and they needed help to identify, what's the right next step for them, and who's the right buyer, and what kind of how big do they need to grow their practice to get the kind of cash payout that they're looking for at the end. Those types of questions are all explored within an exit planning piece. However, what I would say the majority of what I see is folks that are ready to sell, early or as soon as possible. And that conversation with those owners might be a little bit different, because, I may talk with them and say, look, if you really want to achieve these things with your exit strategy, you might want to wait a year, because here's 2 or 3 things that you can work on that's going to dramatically increase the value of your practice or the attractiveness of your practice to a potential buyer or the type of buyer that they're looking for. And so, I always say if for smaller practices, I'd say it's about a minimum of 2 years before you want to start talking to someone about 2 years out. And for mid to larger practices, it's probably 3 to 5 years before you want to start talking with someone, just because there's probably a lot of things that you want to get in place prior to running a full process, a full sales process. And it's if you can eliminate any red flag issues or identify a couple things that will help improve the value of your business in over a 6 to 12 month time frame, you implement those, and you can demonstrate the value of that when you go to the process, you're only going to make the business more attractive and more valuable upon your exit.
Got it. So you said approximately a 2-year horizon. So have you ever had an owner that is coming to you kind of like last minute, or they're kind of already, the deal is kind of started and they're almost like they're trying to potentially slap an exit strategy together? Has that ever occurred? And what are the challenges around that if it does occur?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. I mean, I've gotten some calls by business owners who are mid-process, just because they recognize they're a little bit in over their head, and at that point, it's very difficult to help those folks. You can give them some limited guidance, but you really can't help them, fix issues that have already been identified or whatever. So those calls are often, the sellers don't hear the information that they want to hear. And it's often a challenge to get them to understand it. Look, you really needed to start this a while ago. I also get some calls every once in a while for folks that are, at the LOI stage already with somebody, and that's a little late. I mean, obviously you're able to help some at that point, but that's also a little bit later. The right time is before you even go to market, before you even talk to anyone. You want to talk to an advisor, whether it's my firm or somebody else's, but you want to talk to someone so that you can gather the information about the process, understand the process, and from our firm, we start with the exit plan as the first step, because then that helps us identify who might be the right buyer, the right type of buyer, or specifically the right buyers, 2, 3 buyers, whatever. What the expected terms are going to be, what the expected price is going to be, all those kinds of things. So we can kind of help you along with that, so you have a realistic expectation going into the process. What's going to happen, what the deal terms are going to look like, and you're prepared and not caught off guard anywhere along the way. Probably the best compliment I can get from somebody is, I'm working with a client right now who type A personality, and they know it, and they're very, very nervous going into process. And I got a call from the gentleman this week, and he was saying, you know what, I've been able to sleep at night now. I feel comfortable. I feel like I know what I'm doing. I feel like we have a good process. We just have, I just feel like everything's under control, which, is very, very helpful during a very stressful time for a business owner. You're only going to sell your business once, so you want to do it right.
Right. It's usually going to be the largest transaction of their life. And then if you can kind of help them do things in a more efficient and smooth pattern, you've gone through it many times. And then also, like, how can that owner even quantify or put a dollar value on, like, being more comfortable and actually sleeping better, so that they're like more relaxed about the whole process? At that point, they probably learned about the process. They kind of understood, you were able to manage their expectations about it. So whatever a broker, advisor, consultant might be charging, and folks will have to reach out to you directly to learn more about that. But whatever the fee or the investment is in that process, I mean, how can you put a dollar amount on it if that owner can actually sleep better and is now more comfortable about proceeding into the rest of the potential deal and transaction?
Exactly. I don't know what the dollar amount is on something like that, but I have seen, quite honestly, we've done a recent assessment of the last 5 transactions I've been involved with, and the seller, when they've gone through the process soup to nuts, has exceeded their sales price significantly, which far exceeded any commission or sales fee that a broker or advisor would charge. So not only are you getting more value for your practice, and you're getting it, and you're able to sleep at night. It's just there is a lot of value beyond just what you're paying, in terms of the dollar amount. So.
Got it. And then I was looking at your website. So I was over on physicaltherapybrokers.com and looking at the exit planning component, and the first bullet, understanding your goals. So the therapy practice owner, understanding your goals and timelines. So, every owner is different, right? Some owners are like, I want to exit this year. I mean, maybe it's too late for them to be contacting you, but when we speak to them, sometimes they have an advisor or a broker, sometimes they don't. And then they're saying things like, they're looking to exit this year or next year. So for the next bullet or the next bullet or two about practice valuation and practice assessment, are you guys doing an independent appraisal, or is that something that you and your firm come up with? Maybe you have an in-house person that's doing the appraisal, or is that independent? How do you guys work that?
We do it in-house. We collect all of the financials and operational information that we need to put together a proper appraisal. Prior to doing my own business, I was doing this for 3 larger strategic buyers in the U.S. for many years. So it's a process I'm very comfortable with, and I've been doing for years. And so we do that in-house, and it's pretty standardized in terms of the types of reports that you need, but then there's a little bit of a art to it to get to that adjusted EBITDA, and knowing what a buyer will be willing to credit or not credit is critical, because if you just go with someone that doesn't understand the business real well, they're going to miss a lot, and it's just not going to, you're just not going to get the value out of it. And so one of the things I do recommend to folks is if you do choose to use an advisor, get someone that specializes in therapy practices, just because they know the business so much better, and will be able to identify things that someone who's more of just a general business advisor or broker are just going to miss. They just don't know the business well enough to really understand what the pressure points are from a buyer's perspective.
Got it. What are the pros and cons for you guys if you're doing the appraisal in-house? So we just interviewed another broker on the podcast here, and they were saying that they'll have an external independent firm do an independent appraisal. And then that way it comes back, and now whatever that adjusted EBITDA number is, they said that it'll be more believable. It'll be more believable for the owner, because that broker, consultant, advisor didn't come up with it, or their firm didn't come up with it. And then also the buyer, they say to the buyer, hey, this was independently done. This was not us doing it, because obviously the owner wants top dollar, and the advisor, consultant, broker will get, a commission off of top dollar. So obviously they want the highest amount there. So what are the pros and cons there in terms of the in-house appraisal and coming up with that adjusted EBITDA number, which obviously you should, and your client should and will want to negotiate as large as possible, depending on add backs and all that, versus another firm where they're using an independent appraisal service? Sure.
So the quality of earnings process that is what you're describing is, whenever you go to sell a practice, the buyer's going to have their own appraisal done anyway. And they will engage someone to do the quality of earnings. Now, if you can agree ahead of time to use an independent entity, then that's a fine process to go through. However, what we do is, by doing it independently, first it saves a lot of money, because it's just something that's part of the fees that you pay for with our service. But ultimately, when it comes down to the buyer and they're using their own independent firm, they're going to ask a lot of questions and may not know the business as well as some of the PT advisor brokers, because they're more general business type people, unless they've done a lot of transactions in the PT space. So they end up using a lot of the information that we've developed anyway, and And I've never really had an adjustment on, from a buyer on a quality of earnings process from what we've prepared. So that's the good news is we end up in the same place, but we can do it a lot cheaper because those things can be pretty costly to pay for in advance. And I think you'd find that you're going to save some money by having someone that can do it in-house.
Got it. And then under exit planning on your website, there also you wrote pro forma. You have that as a bullet. So is that something you're gonna come up with? So typically, the owner or the seller, the owner, you're gonna help them with this pro forma, and that factors into valuation, or does that factor into you're gonna present that pro forma to the prospective buyer about, hey, if you increase staff X amount, or based on the financials. So how does the pro forma come into your whole planning with the exit planning?
It could be both. It depends on what the timelines look like. So if the buyer's interested in selling years on down the road, what we're doing is putting together a pro forma based on, hey, we've identified 3 items that you can work on over the next 6 to 12 months. And if you successfully implement them, this is what the pro forma would look like. Or if the buyer wants to add a clinic or close a clinic or something along those lines, we can integrate that into a pro forma so that they can see what that is going to do from a financial perspective, but also what that would do to their valuation if they choose to sell. And so, for the long-term planners, it's a really good tool that helps them identify strategic goals, targets that they need to hit, helps them identify, conversations that they need to have with their staff, and set individual goals, more specific goals that will help them achieve their overarching strategy. It's just a really good tool that helps them get where they want to go. For the short-term folks, that really only comes into play if it's needed. I mean, if I get a call and someone wants to sell within the next 6 to 12 months, we can still do that. You're just not going to have as much time to make any corrective actions if we find anything. What we do in those scenarios is identify those things and say, look, here are a couple things that you need to be aware of because a buyer is going to probably want to correct this issue post close, and just it's not a big deal now, but it's something that an opportunity for improvement down the road. The other piece that we do is a compliance assessment for those folks, and that compliance assessment may identify some areas that you need to clean up. And so that's a piece for the short termers. That's probably where we spend more time getting through that compliance assessment to identify, first off, are there any red flags? And if the red flags, that might be something where we have a conversation. We need to stop doing this, start doing it this way. If there's no financial impact by making that change, then it's not a big deal. We just want to be very open and honest. Hey, we identified this, we corrected it. Here's the plan that we put in place. And then we're open and honest with the buyers about what's going on. If it's something that has a financial impact, that may be when you have a conversation with the seller to say, look, this is an issue. A buyer may or may not be interested in buying with you because of this compliance issue, but here's the corrective action. And it probably is going to cost you X amount of dollars in EBITDA or whatever over the course of a year. We can quantify that. And if you still want to go to market right now, we can, kind of be open and honest about it with a buyer. Say, look, we've identified this. Here's our assessment of what that's going to cost. And we'll just factor that in. So there are multiple things that can come up with any kind of exit planning strategy that, that are going to be helpful either in the near term or in the long term, depending on what your goals are.
So that makes sense. So either the practice owner and you and the team will have to potentially clean up some of those things, because if you still take it to market, like you said, it could affect, or probably will affect it's going to affect the valuation and therefore the overall, asking price or potential offers, right? So, and if they want to go to market, then you guys can disclose that, because otherwise a buyer they'll probably, find some of those compliance issues anyway.
They're
Or
going to find it.
they're going to find it. So, or the practice has to clean those things up, and then now the sale might be pushed another year or two, depending on how long it takes to correct those things.
Correct. Again, that's why it helps to start the process with a little bit more lead time than normal. At least 2 years for a small practice, and 3 to 5 for a mid-sized large practice.
What's the shortest or tightest timeline that you've had a smooth process, if that's possible, or an owner that got what they were looking for and also didn't have any compliance issues, no speed bumps or hurdles?
So that's you're hitting the nail on the head. I have had clients that have great practices. There really wasn't much to work on, and they're ready to go to market right away. And that's a different conversation, right? So we go through the planning process and say, look, you run a great practice. There's no meat on the bone here. You're ready. You're ready whenever you're ready. We'll talk more about who might be a good buyer, philosophically, operationally, who's a good fit. And it's more about finding the right buyer at that point than it is about trying to scramble to fix anything prior to going to market.
Do you see any common themes with some of these therapy practice owners where they already have their house in order? There's no compliance issues. Like maybe they're a more business savvy practice owner. They're probably less likely to be treating patients, or they're not working in the business anymore.
Exactly. They're usually it's a business owner who has done a great amount of succession planning. They have great people around them, great clinic directors or leadership within the clinical side that they feel comfortable. They don't have to be overseeing what's happening in the clinic every minute, and they're focused more on the business at that point. So they can focus on things like compliance, and they can focus on things like, looking at the operational metrics and identifying opportunities, and go to a class or something like that that's going to help them understand, or do an exit planning strategy and help them understand what might be the right things that they need to work on to help maximize the potential of that business. That's the theme typically is that person is no longer treating, not necessarily never treating, but just that's not the largest part of their day anymore.
Got it. That makes sense. And then typically those practice owners, I'm assuming there's going to be some variance here, but I'm assuming those types of practice owners will either have a shorter process, like the whole, process working with you will probably be shorter, and
Correct.
Potentially they will probably be able to negotiate a larger asking price because everything has already been in order and they've been focusing on those things for years.
Yep. As far as the asking price goes, yes, that they will definitely, because their house is in order, it'll be more attractive, so they'll get more aggressive offers. But what having the house in order like that will really do is make the diligence process very quick and efficient. If there's any kind of delay in a process, it's typically in the diligence stage, and diligence can typically last 60 to 90 days anyway. And it really depends on if something's found during diligence that needs to be worked out. So if you have a very clean house and the house is in order and there's nothing found, you just breeze through that process, and we're preparing closing documents within 30 to 60 days instead of working through whatever diligence items came up.
Got it. So then how about the next step in the exit planning process? So in terms of prospective buyers, do you have owners that say, obviously you want to get their input, and then the situation will have your input as well, right? So you're going to know regional buyers who might be the right fit, potential buyer for this type of practice, but also you're getting the input from the practice owner. The practice owner may say things like, maybe they'll say, I only want some smaller regional buyer. Maybe they only want a fellow colleague, practice owner buyer, or they might say, hey, anyone, it could be a corporate, it could be anyone that is looking to make an attractive offer because maybe that's the biggest thing they're focused on. So where do you kind of balance between, you want to take in the input from the owner, and then also you're going to have probably suggestions and ideas of who might be the best buyer?
So we start by educating on the different type of buyers out there. There are several. Obviously, you have the strategic, which is the large big boxes that everyone's known and heard of. You got the regional consolidators, that are operating in their market or a market very close nearby. And then you got the practice owners across the street that might be a potential buyer. You can look also internally. Maybe you have employees who'd be willing to take on an equity stake within the business. And then there's some new buyers out there. There are these, I call them the techno buyers. They're only for certain types of practices, but there are new buyers out there that are leveraging technology to drive patients through practices or drive patients to clinicians. And those folks are looking for facilities as well. So it has to be the right fit. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you educate again, I forgot one other one. If you have a big enough practice, you always have the option of going through some kind of equity buyer as well, a private equity firm or similar. So, they're going to be looking for more what I'll call platform or mini platform size deals, usually, 8, 10 plus clinics to build a platform around. But those are also buyers that that can be considered depending on what the goals of the seller is. So we talk through an education process of the different types of buyers out there. Usually there's one or two that the seller will say, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. I think that's what I'm looking for. So then we talk through a couple of the potential buyers within those categories to say, okay, here's how you operate, and here's how this particular buyer operates. And it may be a good fit, it may not be a good fit. There may be something that I know about that business that I can help educate about. I might not know the regional buyer real well because you don't do a ton of business with those guys. So, at the end of the day, it's identifying who is going to make the right fit, not only for you as a seller, but you also want to extrapolate that down to your staff. Most sellers that I work with have 3 main questions. How much am I going to get paid? What's going to happen to me afterwards? And what's going to happen to my staff? So, we start to explore those 3 topics, those 3 questions with the potential buyers, the buyer types, and what the expectations are going to be from the various buyers for those three pieces: purchase price, employment of the seller afterwards, and what's going to happen to their staff.
So isn't that all like typically not dictated by the owner, but the owner is going to say, like, the owner's going to already have their preference, right? So some owners are going to say, I'm looking to help with the transition for, maybe 3 months or something like that. But really, like, they're trying to move on to the next chapter of their life. Maybe they want to travel more. They might move to another state, whatever it is. They'll kind of want to dictate that, right? Or it depends on the buyer, though, because then the buyer might say, well, depending on the financials and the stability of the practice, they may want that owner to stick around for 1 or 2 or 3 years, right? So how does that conversation go? I know every owner in practice is different.
Yeah. So I've worked with buyers who are very clear that they want to exit within a short period of time. And that's fine, but we just need to be upfront and honest with a buyer about that to make sure that they understand that's the goal of the seller. And that's going to impact things. That's going to add risk from a buyer's perspective. This business, the physical therapy business, is and always will be a relationship business. And a strategic buyer or a large buyer has enough resources that they can put a clinic across the street from your clinic tomorrow. But if they don't have the relationships that you've developed over the years, they're not going to be very successful. And that's ultimately what a buyer is purchasing when they do an acquisition. They're buying the relationships. So if that owner has those relationships and they're saying, but I'm leaving in 3 months, that's a very different scenario for a buyer. And it's going to either impact deal terms or purchase price or both. And so you educate the seller on that and say, okay, we can do that. Just recognize it's probably going to take a little bit off the top and what we can get. If you're willing to stick around for 2 years or longer, then I think we can, that's going to be a much for play for a buyer. And those folks they're going to be a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more attracted to a business like that.
Got it. So just to recap those top three questions that you say that owners typically care about the most or ask you the most. So you said, one, how much can I get paid? Like, how much
purchase price.
Purchase price. Number two, what's going to happen to me afterwards? And then number three, of course, what's going to happen to my staff afterwards? Now, a buyer wants that staff to stay in place, right? They want stability. They
not always.
Not okay. So give us an example. Maybe if someone maybe is not productive or underperforming or what.
So it's usually not the clinical staff that there's any challenges with. It's typically
there might be some redundancy with the admin or billing staff.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And so there may be some synergy that a buyer is going to be interested in, maybe replacing a billing department or something along those lines. That's not always the case, but in some cases that will be that is something that a seller needs to be aware of. If they've had somebody in those roles with them for 20 years, that's something that they may not be able to stomach. And so again, it's walking through the expectations from the lens of a buyer, as you're going through this process, just so you're prepared and you understand what you're asking or not asking as you go through the process. So people, if they are not aware of these types of things, they have an idea. This is the type of buyer, or this is the buyer I want to go with. But once they start to peel back the layers of the onion, they recognize that might not be the right buyer for them. And sometimes they change gears. Sometimes not, but sometimes they change gears. You just want to give everyone the tools and education so that they understand and can make the decision that fits what they want to do the best.
Right. So if there's an owner out there that doesn't want that 20-year employee that's doing admin and billing to not be let go, to not be fired, whatever, then they would probably want to look to either a smaller buyer, but not a corporate buyer that's going to immediately already have, regional or national, billing and a call center and all those types of things, right?
Correct. And billing, quite honestly, good billers are hard to come by. So most strategics aren't going to eliminate billers, but there are other functions. If you have, finance or different functions in the back office, but that sometimes it's billing, sometimes it's other functions. It really depends on how the seller's business is set up, their business model, their administrative model, and if there's any redundancies there that a strategic or buyer may see.
Got it. So when you have this conversation with these owners, they're giving you that input. You're saying, here's their options. Now, the next step would be, if you guys figured out who might be the potential ideal buyer, or you probably want to have, a couple offers, couple of different buyers come in. Are you putting that practice on like a not your website? I don't see like a broker listing, but I know some of these brokers are doing like, they have an email list and they put the anonymous practice, on market. Do your transactions and deals, do they go on market anywhere, like anonymously on market? Or do you do all the private contacting to buyers directly? Like how does that go? I know that would be important for owners to hear.
Yeah, I have relationships with 32 strategic buyers in the US right now that it's an email or a text just to say, hey, we create usually something called a teaser, which is just a high level summary of the business, a general geography of where it's located. And we send that along with a non-disclosure agreement and say, hey, here's a practice that's coming to market. Here's a little bit about it. Here's about the geography it's in. If you're interested, let's get an NDA signed, and then we can start to get you through the process from there. So, that list of folks that we start with, usually we get it down, depends on what the seller is interested in, but usually there's somewhere between 3 and 8 or 10 potential buyers that we're going to be interested in talking with for any particular deal, sometimes more actually, but at the end of the day, it really depends on what the buyer's goal is. And there are some people that or some buyers you may just want to eliminate right off the get-go based on the seller's goals. And there's some that, that you may want to add, a local practice kind of thing that you want to explore in addition to other buyers. So you might have a list. It's probably about 8 eight potential buyers that we start with, and then I reach out to those folks directly. And if it's not anyone I have a relationship like with, such as a local buyer, we get their information and we'll just call them directly and establish that relationship and get them the information to see if they're interested.
And then how do those conversations go? Do you usually have, three-way phone calls with the buyer and the seller, or are you doing mostly those interactions and then you kind of report back to the therapy owner, the seller? How do those steps go?
Yes. So that's really just the tip of the sales process. So we start with that. Let's say you're starting with a list of 10. We send out, the teaser and NDAs to 10 different folks. Let's say 8 of them are interested and sign NDAs. So now we've already eliminated 2. The next step is we issue something called a SIM, a confidential information memorandum to the sellers to the buyers that signed an NDA. That has a lot more information around there. Typically the process would go from there to an initial offer. So of the 8, maybe 6 are interested and put in offers at a specific time. Then we're really starting to work through those offers with the seller, and there's probably a management meeting in there as well, where we're either meeting in person or online with the buyers and the sellers just to get to know each other. The offers come in and we start walking through the offers with the sellers to help them understand what the offers mean, and provide guidance as to which may make the best fit for their financial goals and philosophical goals, their exit planning goals, all those things. And then we try and, usually whittle it down to 2 or 3 that are most interested in, and work to get a letter of intent from them, which is a more formal offer from the folks. At that point, they've done a little bit of homework on the practice to make sure it's something that they're interested in. And that's when things get really, really interesting and serious, because now we know we have 2 interested parties, the buyer and the seller, are extremely interested in moving forward at that point.
Got it. And that LOI is non-binding, so whatever that offer might be in there, it could change, but for the most part, it does show, like you said, it shows that they're putting time into it, and that that prospective buyer is a lot more serious. So it also kind of helps with you with like qualifying who's really serious and moving forward.
Correct.
And then, so typically it funnels down probably from that point, right? In terms of how many of the total LOIs you're going to get. And then, you and the owner are going to go back and forth and continue that process of, weighing the pros and cons, who might be the best fit based off of those terms and what they're offering and all that.
Correct.
So then in terms of the next couple steps, I mean, really then it gets into evaluating the price and the terms, what is in the best interest of the owner, what they want. You're giving them guidance along the way. What are the next couple steps? I mean, at that point, you're getting closer to...
Well, once you sign the LOI, you're going right into diligence, and you're looking to close somewhere generally about 90 days from the time the LOI is signed. Sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, depending on how things go. But generally, it's about 90 days there.
Got it. Excellent. I think that's a good review of exit strategy, exit planning, and then kind of going all the way from there into close to the finish line. Then those 3 months are going to be, like you said, due diligence, financial due diligence, legal due diligence, looking at everything.
All that stuff. Yep.
Looking at everything. You're helping these owners along the way. So are you speaking with them during this whole 90-day process? If it, approximately 90 days, are you speaking with them every couple of days? Yeah. Is it, weekly touch points?
Typically we have one-on-ones with the seller to kind of just update and explain what's going on. I'm working also usually with the buyer to address their questions, get them the information data that they need, and usually attend all of the diligence calls between the buyer and or the seller or the whoever needs to be interviewed. So I'm just sitting in on those and helping facilitate those meetings. I don't run them. The buyer's running them. But if there's a question that's asked that the seller doesn't understand, or if there's a question that we don't have the information on, I will start to follow up and see if we can get that information. And so it's just, I sit on the entire process, soup to nuts, because there are a lot of things that can come up in those calls that we need to be aware of. And, sometimes, if there's something that we can get out in front of, if something comes up in diligence, we might be able to put the fire out, before there is one, just by being aware of what's going on and being part of those conversations.
Excellent. I think that's a good place to just pause for now. I definitely got to have you back on the podcast. There's so many other topics that we can dive deep on. But that gives a great outline and a great perspective from you and helping so many owners. It also, I believe, it helps that you're a physical therapist with your background, and you were a VP of operations in a big national company physical therapy practice. So definitely helps to have that perspective. And you have been in these physical therapy practices. You know exactly what the treatment looks like, what the dynamic looks like. You've been in that mix for years, if not decades, and that way, it lends a lot of credibility and authority to you and your firm, that then you're helping practice owners, take their initial idea of timeline and, considering potentially selling to the point all the way through across the goal line and getting them to their next chapter of their life, getting this deal closed and making sure that their staff is taken care of and figuring out everything that's going to happen to that owner after the sale.
Yep. Great summary.
Excellent. So guys, you can reach out to Mike Piekutoski at physicaltherapybrokers.com. What's a good place elsewhere on the internet, Mike? Maybe your email address or LinkedIn, or what's a good place you want owners to reach out to you and learn more?
Probably the easiest is just my email, which is Mike at physicaltherapybrokers.com.
Excellent. We'll leave it there. We'll definitely have you back. I have several different topic ideas. We only have so much time right now allocated to this call, so we can't go crazy. I wanted it to be we wanted to be focused on exit planning, and hopefully we accomplished that. We'll definitely have you back on sometime soon, Mike. Really appreciate your time, and everyone check out physicaltherapybrokers.com.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? We might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE at CONCIERGE painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.